Lang managed to make the film his own, full of menace and mystery. It is, of course, a thriller, a definite part of the film noir tradition, full of typical Langian concerns, the ambiguity of guilt, a breaking through a moral trap towards redemption and redefinition of identity, a realistic nightmare where seemingly secure certainties give way suddenly. It is also something more than this. Lang wanted to make another anti Nazi statement, and his realist fantasies used to good effect. The film has a ring of truth. Those are words from Lang's biographer, Lottie Eisner, on his 1944 film, Ministry of Fear. Seeing Faces in Movies, a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about Ministry of Fear. So, very quick synopsis of the film is Stephen Neill is released into World War II England after 2 years in an asylum, but it doesn't seem so sane outside either. On his way back to London to rejoin civilization, he stumbles across a murderous spy ring and doesn't quite know to whom to turn. Tagline for the film is menace behind every shadow, suspense in every move. The film stars Ray Milland as Stephen Neill, Marjorie Reynolds as Carla, Carl Esmond as Willie, and Dan Doria as Cost. It's written by Cine Miller, based on the novel by Graham Greene. Cinematography by Henry Sharp, directed by Fritz Lang, edited by Archie Marshik, music by Victor Young, and costumes by Edith Head. Today I have back on the show Rolo Tony. It's been a while, but we previously did A Woman Under the Influence and Ghost Dog. Those are two very fantastic films. And today we're talking about Fritz Lang, and we're talking about Ministry of Fear. So a film that's a little bit underseen in his filmography. But before we even get into that, I just want to say, first of all, thanks for coming back on the show. I'm very excited to have you back on.
Thank you so much for having me back on. Like, I love doing this show. I feel like this covers a large gamut in terms of like the great auteurs. And the moment that you were like, let's do Ministry of Fear, I'm just like, sign me up. Let's go.
Good. I'm excited because I know this film. Well, we'll get into it. It's not as loved as I like to think, but I do have a very huge soft spot for it. But I know that you have been working on a lot of stuff, namely a podcast that you co-host. I'd love to hear more about it and what it's about, how you started that show.
Sure. Yeah. So I co-host a show called These Guys Got Juice. I co-host it with Doug, known on Twitter as the Doug Files. You can follow
Mm-hmm.
him there. And it's a show that he was doing with a friend named Nick. And Nick started doing more of a horror podcast. And he's like, I don't know if I can make time for These Guys Got Juice. So
Mm-hmm.
Doug started doing more of a guest-oriented show. And then it was one of those situations where he just kept on having me on because we had good rapport. And then it got to the point where it was like, like you're kind of like the Vegas residency co-host. So I put that in my profile. I was like, that's funny. And then, no, I'm just co-hosting it now. It just got to the point
Nice.
where, he just didn't kick me off. And that, that works for me. And what we do with the show is we kind of follow where what we're feeling, at least within each, season. And but, like, when I started co-hosting the show more regularly, that was around Halloween time, and we started covering a lot of found footage horror films because we felt that that's, like, a, underrated area of horror, and now as we're moving into the summer, we've been covering a lot of political thrillers as well as, like, films directed by actors. Also just recently covered the filmography of Matt Johnson to kind of cover
Nice.
everything that he's been doing leading up to the Nirvana the Band the Show movie, and, we've also been dabbling in television reviews. We've been
Mm-hmm.
doing,
I saw that.
the pit yes, we've been doing, the pit recaps, and for whatever reason, we have Jared Gilman from Moonrise Kingdom who's been joining us. That was just like one of those things where we had him on for another show. We were like, "Hey, we're gonna be talking about the pit afterwards if you wanna join us." And he just really enjoyed it, so he just kept on doing it. So we're gonna keep
Nice.
on doing it, and we have plans for more. So when it comes to what I do on my show, I guess, that's what I'd say. And then I'm definitely doing a lot of things elsewhere. And essentially, like, just so the listener at home knows what, like, I'm doing, why I'm doing all these shows. I'm just really passionate about film. I love
Mhm.
conversations. I go where the conversations go. And I think that there's a lot more that could be accomplished with, two people over webcam than, talking with words on Twitter. But that could be fun
Yes.
too. Where I'm getting at to there is, this week, I'm not sure when this episode's coming out, but, I'll have an episode dropping on In Films We Trust with Larry Fessenden, the horror filmmaker, and I'm really excited to share that. There's gonna be some more interview stuff like that coming soon. I won't, like, say what you just yet, but there's plans.
Mhm.
But yeah, I wanna move more in that direction because I think that it's more important to have conversations like with you, Felicia, who cares about, like, the history of film, and then also to talk about, people who are actually in the industry at all levels, getting their perspective on all of the trajectory through all of the different genres, all et cetera. I've been rambling a lot. You can cut a lot of this down.
No,
But
no.
yeah, that's all I wanted.
No, I love that, and that's fantastic, and I saw the news, about, the episode that you have with In Film We Trust. No, but that's fantastic. Any conversation about film, it feels very especially in a healthy way, feels very productive. That's why I keep doing the show, even when I take mini breaks. What keeps me coming back is wanting to just have conversations with other human beings, such as yourself, who will feel the same way about film. So I'm excited. But before we even get into Ministry of Fear, I know I keep saying before we get into it, I do have one last question that is related to Lang. Curious to hear how you started getting into Fritz Lang films, especially with a name like Fritz Lang. Sometimes people hear about the name and then they're like, okay, I need to watch the films. And sometimes they happen upon a film first and then they realize, oh, this is the Fritz Lang. How is it for you and how many have you seen so far?
So I need to come right out and say that he's not like one of my guys, like I was
Mm
not like, a massive Fritz Lang guy coming into this, right? But like when you came to me and you're like, I want to talk about Fritz Lang, I see that as a challenge where I'm like, yes, I want to know more about Fritz Lang. I want to do more about this, right? And the
hmm. Mm hmm.
reason that I'd never move forward too much with my Fritz Lang appreciation is because I am such a silent movie fan and I really loved Metropolis. And I, of course, really love M, right?
Mm hmm.
But a part of me was always like, and then he went to America and he made a bunch of talkies, and that was that. And I was fine living in that world because I am such a, sucker for those like, 2 hour long, super emotional silent films, crazy scores. And with Metropolis specifically, obviously it's a very lauded film, but M is really the one that I think is the one I came into this loving the most.
Mm hmm. Mm hmm.
And for obvious reasons as well, we could talk about Emma in relation to this, obviously, because people often say it's like the birth of noir, and I'm sure there's
Yeah.
things that you can say about that. And my final note on my history with Lang is that of my dismissal of his films in his American era, I did watch The Big Heat because I knew it was a big film, and I really enjoyed it. And even though I say I really enjoyed it, I never was super passionate about it, and the
Mm hmm.
reason being was because, a lot of M, even though it's, like, solidifying, the genre conceits and constraints, it felt like it was also innovating, and then something that I noticed with The Big Heat was that I was pulling back and pulling back and pulling back, to the point where it was like, all of those things are fair, but it's the best versions of those things. It's just a different kind of filmmaker. So what I recognized in that moment was that Lang goes through an evolution throughout his career, between those, Weimar Germany, then to that point. And I think Ministry of Fear comes in at a very interesting point where it's in the middle of World War II. He's still in that transitionary period out of that Weimar brain headspace and moving more so into the formalism of American filmmaking.
I mean, I very much agree. That's a great way to encompass where he ends up, in comparison to his start. So I thank you for bringing that up. I also wish I'd known that you were a huge silent film fan because I kind of dabbled with the idea of doing a silent of his, but kind of just passed on it and figured maybe I can incorporate it in a future series
Sure.
or somewhat, but there's many other silent films too. So now that I know, that's fantastic. Because it's hard to find people who want to talk about a silent film, to be honest.
There are some days where I think that silent films are the best kind of films. There are some days where I'm like the kind of filmmaking that was happening in that period, right? Like
Hmm.
the ways that people had to invent like displaying information and delivering it to people, because like it's one thing when we talk about like the whole singing in the rain thing, right? The transition of
Yeah.
sound. How do people make those adjustments? And certainly there's a conversation we had with Lang there, but I think that it's actually more interesting in the sense that silent films only had existed feature films didn't start getting made until like the 1890s, really,
Hmm.
right? And even then they were like maybe 30 minutes long at most. So
Hmm.
like the idea of like a formal structured film as the way that we know it probably didn't really become a thing until 1910, right? So that means that from like 1910 to like 1925, that's like 15 years, they had to develop storytelling as we know it in film. And I think that just as a conceit, right? That is why silent film is the most interesting from certain perspectives, right? I think that, when it comes to the stuff that I've been talking about recently as well, I've been talking about a
Hmm.
lot of modern stuff. So I also feel like maybe my reaction to silent film in this moment is a reaction to that as well, where I'm like
Yeah,
being inundated
that's
with what's
fair.
being come out. And I'm like, maybe I do want to just live in Metropolis again. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's very fair as someone who is very bad at keeping up with a new cinema. And I try, but I definitely don't try as hard as I should. Last thing I'll say before we actually get into the film is I had seen most of Lang's talkies, we could say. So this was a great opportunity for me to watch his silent stuff because I'd only seen Metropolis. So I got to go back and watch almost all of his silent stuff. And
Oh, wow.
they're, like, insane. Like, they're very, very good. So, highly recommend to the listener, even if you're not a silent movie fan, I think the way to get into it is to find the type of movie that will, at least pique your interest. Metropolis is a great example, and often, people would consider that one of the best, but Doctor Mabuse, which I know we'll, eventually talk about during this episode,
Mhm.
and Woman in the Moon, which looks astounding, and what he was able to do in that movie, again, don't wanna give too much away, but highly recommend. Just visually, you will not come out of that movie thinking, "This was boring." So, that's our, plea to watch more silent film for the
Do it.
show. You gotta have at least one every season, one plea. I should do it more often. But
Mhm.
Ministry of Fear in 1944. Preface this by saying this is like a lot of films. It's a film that's based on a novel by novelist Graham Greene, who's not an unknown novelist by any means. Especially nowadays, people would know Graham Greene quite a bit. Again, like I mentioned, I really like this movie, but again, it's not as well known and it's not as well loved by a lot of people. And both Graham Greene and Lang are not huge fans of this movie. And there's multiple things leading up to that. To give, not to get into a huge lengthy amount of details, but where Lang was in his career, he is basically awarded what he wants. He is very well established and he's a director in demand. He often in his contract, almost always in his contract, had it written out that he would have final say in the script and like essentially creative control because he was Fritz Lang at this
Yeah.
point. And he originally bid to get this novel, to get the rights himself for this novel, but the studio outbid him and then hired him to do it. They're like, "Yeah, you could do it, but we're gonna have creative control." And his agents forgot to put it in the contract that he will have final say on the script. So he had no say, and the screenwriter was also the producer. So he really had absolutely no say. By the time he got the script, he was like, "Well, you kind of butchered the novel," and he wasn't happy about it, but he figured he could try and do something out of it. The the main differences I'm sure there's a lot of differences because I haven't read the book and I am very interested
Yeah.
to read it at some point. The main difference is that it dampens the presence of Nazis in the film,
Yeah.
be
Big time.
which you can kinda tell from watching, especially maybe not on a first watch, but on a subsequent watches, you can definitely tell, like, should have been more of this, and it's not there. As people, I have to I maybe you have read the novel, but if we're talking about this as 2 people who haven't read the novel but are
Mhm.
kind of living in modern world of what's happening today, but also in a world where we know what happened then and what Fritz Lang's goals were and his life in Germany and him coming over to America. There's a lot there that I just said, but you as a viewer watching this for the first time and seeing that, okay, there's a kind of a twist here where Nazis are not just the overarching villain, but they're also the villain within his venture, and the mystery that he's going through, and how it kind of feels like a bit of an afterthought. I don't know how if you felt that way when you watched it, that it just didn't carry through to its full potential.
So, like, I had never seen this movie before, and you had recommended it to me, and I was like, "Absolutely, I'm going to check this out." And I didn't really know was so much about Nazis. I just knew from like the log line that there was going to be that level of it, and I also knew that Lang had that propaganda background in terms of American filmmaking. But what I really like about this film, and this is helpful for anybody who may or may not have read the book or seen the movie. The movie opens with Ray Milland, right? Who we got to call out right now, fantastic actor, right? Just being
I
in this
love him.
movie. There's definitely more we have to crack into specifically with the premise of this film. And actually, you know what? Maybe I'll just lead right into it, right? So the thing about this movie is that whether or not the Nazis are as pronounced as they are in the original source material, the filmmaking is always letting you know that something is wrong, and that
Mhm.
like there's a malevolent presence that's just like hanging over your head at all times. And as we're opening with Ray Milland, he's leaving a mental institution for, something we'll learn later. But he goes to a carnival, and the carnival has this like effect where everybody is looking at him and peering at him. And it was very easy for me to get into this movie's wavelength because obviously the connection to Nightmare Alley is right there. If you've seen Nightmare Alley, then you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of like that. The crazy thing is that this is before Nightmare Alley. This movie is
Yeah.
predating that. So it's set in London, right? And it's talking about Nazis. And, you say that the Nazi stuff has been pulled back, but you actually feel more of the Nazis' presences than even the London, like, authorities' presence, really. Like, you get the
Yes.
cops at the end, but, like, there's always this idea of, like, the Nazis are watching, they're secretly in control of things. And it had this effect where, like, you hear about, like, when Americans go overseas, right? And, like, the soldiers are in the trenches, and then, like, the enemy will put pamphlets down, right, that delivers propaganda to try to encourage them to go back home, right? Essentially talking
Mhm.
about, like, social, inequality, things like that, right? And a lot of this film is featuring people who are in those Nazi positions, kind of, like, pushing people to those sympathies, but not, like, outright saying those things. This movie is very sinister and, like, not really, playing its full hand. And I think that has everything to do with, the time in which Lang was leaving, Weimar Germany, soon to be Nazi Germany. Like, I don't know if we wanna move too much away from the film, but, like, I wanted to bring up the
Feel
Testament of
free,
Dr. Mabuse.
please, please.
Have you seen the Testament of Dr. Mabuse or no?
I have.
And direct, sequel to M, strangely enough, right? But what's interesting about this film, and the reason we're bringing it up in this context, is because this was the film that got Lang kicked out of Germany, right? This
Mhm.
idea that, uh, Goebbels, the guy who was in charge of, Nazi propaganda, he was essentially upset with the way that the film was portraying, Dr. Mabuse because he, line for line, talks about, building the endless empire of
Yeah.
crime in quotations, but, you can fill it in the rest. And apparently the Nazis were upset that, the movie was more open-ended. They wanted it to be, like, more firm, and
Mhm.
that was the reason. But Lang said that after this meeting, Goebbels wanted him to essentially become the new face of German cinema as they,
Mhm.
started taking over. That scared Lang, and he left. Now, that's the story that's been told, but, there are people who've gone back in history and have been like, not all of this stuff, lines
Lines
up.
up. Yeah.
You've heard this as well, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think that there's anything like, you know, at the end of the day, Lang left and he definitely did devote his life to American cinema, right? He did do
Yes.
that, right? But the one thing that we do need to discuss in referencing all of that,
Mhm.
separate from his wife, we'll get to that. But living at Germany in that time, he's trying to like move through and still succeed. And then he left the moment that he recognized things were too far. He was like,
Yes.
he was almost like, daydreaming or like walking through life,
Mhm.
hoping that wouldn't happen, then realized it did, and then left. That's the way I see it, at least, right? And I feel like that there's a closeness there to the way that Ray Milland is actually operating in this film and what's happening there.
I think that's a great comparison, and I agree. It's easy to look back, and I know people have kind of debunked the way he's told some stories and been like, "Well, I don't think that could have actually happened that way," and it might be a combination of him, like, Lang himself misremembering because at the point when he was being interviewed about this stuff, he was much older, and also just being like, looking back on a time and maybe regretting waiting as long as he did to leave, but I think it's something we can all relate to, especially now and being like, "Oh, we didn't realize things would go down this fucking seriously."
Yeah.
We're talking in a day today we're recording this April 7th,
Yep.
2026.
The day before the bombs fell.
I mean, I hope not, but, like, to be honest, I don't even know. It's we were just talking before we pressed record, we're talking about the overarching anxiety that, any decent person can feel, and also that's kind of relevant not kind of, it's very much relevant to this film because I feel like there's an overarching anxiety that kinda leads me into one of my second points of this being, we talk about the genre of paranoid thrillers, and I think it's associated very often with the stuff from the late '60s, and especially the '70s, and I might have picked one of those for my double bill, being cheeky, but it does stem from much further back because it's just been a thing that has been relevant, and I think this is very much an early paranoid thriller. It's weird the levels of paranoia that are present throughout this film. Some of the which you've mentioned especially, which I love the way yes, the movie opens up with him leaving the asylum, but him entering the carnival and the eeriness of the carnival because it doesn't look like it's and I know it's of course, it's shot in black and white, but it doesn't look like this is, like, a pleasant carnival like most carnivals do often look in a film.
The introduction to the scene is you got these kids who are playing, right? And then they're like, "Okay, well, we only have an hour till curfew. Like, don't go too far or else
I
we can't
know.
find you," right? Like, there's the introduction to this is just dread, right?
I
And you
know,
defeat
exactly.
that in a fun scenario, so it's like an oxymoronic setting that this is happening.
And it kinda puts things into perspective if especially if you're going into this fully cold and not realizing that this is actually set in, the time that it's, being released. So the war is still happening. And there's the levels of that paranoia of just things that the world that he's entering back into because he's been away for a while, and things were not this way when he left, even though I can't remember if he says exactly I'm sure he does, and I'm just, like, escaping my mind how long he was in there because the war might have been
2
already
years.
happening. 2 years? Okay, so the war was still already happening, but a lot can happen in 2 years, as we all know. So it
Mhm.
still felt different to him. There's a paranoia of him just again, he leaves an asylum at the start, and to that, it's like a red flag probably to a lot of people being like, "Wait a minute, what?" And it's weird because so much happens in succession after that it's something you forget, but it's not top of mind until it comes back up. There's the paranoia of Nazis and Nazi culture coming into play, and also just the supernatural paranoia that kind of touches upon in this film. And there's so many layers to that. How do you feel about the genre of paranoid thrillers and how Lang tackles it in this? Because I feel like his version of it, as you mentioned, again, I don't know if we had started recording, but you mentioned this being a mood piece, and I think
Oh,
that's
yeah.
really important to talk about when we talk about his version of a paranoid thriller. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I think that this actually has to go way like, this has a lot in common way back with, like, M, right? Because this is
Mhm.
obviously, we talk about M as, like, the starter of the noir genre. But what people kind of study from M, but then get wrong, and when they try to copy it, is that what makes a Fritz Lang noir film so interesting is that there are no strictly good and strictly bad people, right? Like there is
Mhm.
always like some noirs they try to make those good guy bad guy delineations really clear, but Fritz Lang films, the cops will be kind of, mean and will do the wrong things to get the right results, all that stuff. And then the criminals will do the right things, despite, having, a bad background. It's this kind of bleeding of intentionality to the point where you start to question, like, if anybody is truly good or bad. And I think that it's specifically interesting in this film's context because we now have it so we're set in England, right? And rather than us focus on why the Nazis are bad. We're focusing on how terrible the daily life in England is. We're focusing on how surreal and how much has been stripped away from these people. And the idea of Ray Milland coming out of this insane asylum, it's meant to be a reflection of the headspace of people in that era, right? And, not to go too deep in a film that I haven't seen, but I do want to bring up a Fritz Lang film that he made a couple years prior, which was called Manhunt, right? Did you see this one or no?
I have seen
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
so you could probably fill this in a bit better than me, but the concept is that a British hunter like
Mhm.
gets Hitler in his scope, but doesn't actually shoot him. It's just like, for the thrill of it, right? You want to talk maybe a bit about like how that's like in relation to this noir aspect, right? Because I think that that speaks to Lang's headspace.
Yeah, and I think it's really good that you brought up the way he goes about crafting characters and the fact that nothing is black or white or binary in any way. Because as you mentioned, Manhunt, again, it's not a film that I particularly love, and I've only seen it once, but it is interesting in the scope of his career and of, as you said, a character who has the ability to, he comes across, Hitler's summer home essentially and he does have the ability to end things there, but is like, do I want to be the person to do this? Is this right to take things into my own hands? And it's, the psychology of his characters is always more interesting to him and to the viewer than the acts. And it stems back again to his silent stuff, but also something that people would see more is of you seeing a character like that is vile, but it's also exploring why he would do such acts. And Manhunt is interesting because on surface level, especially again, relevant to today, you would be like, well, why wouldn't you just do it? But then you have to think back to yourself and be like, well, could I do it?
Mhm.
Maybe it'd be easier for me to say someone else should do it. Can I do it? And that's the question he's asking in that movie. And it's kind of the question that he kind of asked throughout his career. Essentially what he's asking in this film in a
Yes.
broader scope.
And I definitely wanna bring I brought up Manhunt specifically and its time frame because it's interesting to point out that that film came out before America got involved in the war, right? It's like this pointed, like, agitation to the viewer, right? Where it's like, "We coulda done something, but you didn't," right?
Yeah.
Like, you knew the truth, but you didn't make that step, right? And while that's easy to point out as, like, he's making a propaganda piece, I think it's actually something a bit different where Lang is actually like interrogating the psychology of the people of the time by doing that. And then also, there has to also be the thing that we'll get to a bit later on with his wife, this idea that maybe he has more conflicted, feelings about, even leaving Germany that definitely plays into this film. But the last thing I'll leave this off on is that Hitchcock, right, is often the filmmaker that people compare Lang to and from,
Yep.
right? And I think that it's important to point out that Hitchcock is far more a sensationalist. He is far more reveling in, tricking the audience. Whereas
Yes.
Fritz Lang, he's trying to create a tapestry almost. Like he's trying to like create an entire world and then either lets it come crumbling down or lets it play out to its natural conclusion.
And I think bringing up, him creating a tapestry is fantastic because it leads into the next point. The world that he creates and the visuals of
Mhm.
his film. So There's one point in this that I do wanna save because it's essentially what I have as my main point for the trademarks, the 3rd segment, and that's, like, the sets in this film because
Yes.
they're astounding. But we can still talk about the visuals before we get into that, and, this being a mood piece with a story, it's not a lot of mood pieces are there's something a little bit more fluid. This does have a very coherent story with all even with all the twists and turns. It's you'd be hard pressed not to be able to follow the story, but it feels very much like it's stemming from, at this point, him being director who kind of started the noir genre without before the genre was really a thing in his home country, comes to America and essentially kind of popularizes the noir genre, despite the fact that it's a very American genre, and he's not an American director, but he's doing American films, but also visually stems back to, again, the other genre that's very popular in Germany, or was popular in Germany before it kind of disbanded, was German expressionism. And
Yes.
that's where we're getting you're looking at this film, and because it's kind of essentially boiled like, if you wanna look on the top of surface level, it's a murder mystery type story, and it doesn't need to look this good. It could just operate off of the twists and turns like another director probably would, just be like, "Let the story tell itself." But visually, he's setting the tone. And I know he doesn't love this movie, but I think visually it's hard not to be captivated by how beautiful it looks and how eerie it feels and how great Ray Milland is in playing in that because I love him in general, but
Oh, yeah.
I think he plays with the mood so beautifully as it shifts, throughout this film. I'm wondering how you feel about how this film looks just visually.
Like, we brought up the carnival scene earlier, right? And
Mhm.
that was probably, like, one of the few instances where I felt like Fritz Lang's camera work, like, in terms of
Yeah.
fluidity, really came about because like, this movie's rather locked off, and it's done so on purpose, and I'll get into that a bit more a bit later on. But, like, what he's really good at doing is, he because I always think about it too, about, like, the format in which people are watching these films too, right? He does a lot
Yeah.
of, like, the top, like, maybe, like, 10th of the frame. That's where a lot of the action is happening, is always in the
Mhm.
top quadrant of the frame, and he's trying to force, like, a giant tall effect. He's trying to make you feel enveloped by what you're seeing, and what you're catching in Mystery of Evil is something that's a little brighter than his other noir work, like, usually there's more shadows playing around, but purposefully things are a little brighter, they're in, like, well-lit rooms, but then there are a sequence where the lights go out, or they're in the dark at night, where it's, like, upending those little things, just ever so slightly, while still keeping us on the path. Like you said, it's a very easy to follow film, so visually, it's reflecting that where it's not complicating matters. The most that we get of that will come from, like, the moments where we're silhouetting a room through, gunshots, One of my favorite shots is near the end when, like, they're on the apartment, you know? They've got
Yes, I
the door
know.
frame, and you can see the shots coming from there, and it's framed with them. Like, it's clear there's clearly stuff that's going on there, but when it comes to, like, using the frame to better illustrate, Milan's own inner turmoil, I feel like the film isn't as expressionist as something like, The Testament of Dr. Mabuse. I feel like that film, it's like the moment that things start to go crazy, you're in those characters' headspace. When it comes to this film, it's far more on the performance, like, we're allowing
Yes.
Ray to take it over, and I feel like that's what we're starting to see with Lang as he transitions into this American style of filmmaking, is that he's allowing these performances to take over. And something else you were talking about before is this idea of, the expressionism and how he's paring it down, going into these American films. I see that as, stripping it down to the bare essentials, right? And Lang is not so much like, losing his experimental streak. It's more so
Mhm.
just being like, he knows that this is the bare minimum for this to work. The run times go down drastically the moment he moves to America, right? This movie's like 90 minutes, which is crazy,
Mhm.
So to me, it's like efficiency is almost on the forefront of his mind at this point, and the visual storytelling almost reflects that as well.
Yeah, and, him being more efficient and also understanding how the American studio system works and how they love things to be
Yeah.
like efficient. They want people to be pumping out movies, and I've talked about a quite a few directors now who have come over. You know, the series right before this is on Renoir, who had a brief stint in America, and he was just like, I don't understand what you guys want from me. I have to go back, and he left after a few films. And then I also talked about Douglas Sirk, who is also, he was German, and how he also left, like Lang, because of what was going on over in his country and came over to America and really did excel the same way Lang did. For Renoir, a French filmmaker, the French are bred differently than Germans, and he just was like, "I don't need this." And the other ones were more like, "Okay, I can work with this and still have my own personality through it," and I think, Lang very much does. And again, as you mentioned, he's being more efficient and he's not being as artsy, maybe. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the best word, as he might have been in his past life, but also noting that it's a different audience, it's a different time, and you can only do so much because a lot of the films probably would not have been accepted at the time, and yet I'm sure nowadays we would be still talking about it because that's how film works. A lot of times something was not appreciated then, and it's appreciated later, such as something like Ministry of Fear that
Right.
is in, if we want to use this as a marker of success, it is in the Criterion Collection. I have that
Right.
copy. I also have the Indicator copy, which is they're both fantastic and shows that there's still an interest in talking about the lesser known Lang films. But I think visually it's just really stunning. And I do wanna talk about the sets later
Yeah.
because I think there's a lot of fantastic work that was being done. Um, one of the last points just, that I wanna mention, because I know you have, some stuff you wanna talk about as well, but we've kinda touched upon the fact that it's an easy to follow film, but there's a lot of twists
Totally.
and turns in this, and some of the complaints that I've read about this was that the twists and turns feel too obvious, and you can kinda guess what the result is. And sometimes for people that just doesn't let them allow them to enjoy the film. For me, I don't care if I necessarily know I can guess the ending. For me, it's how you get there, which sounds corny, but I just enjoy the ride that I'm on when I'm watching a film like this as someone who's, like, a huge, like, Agatha Christie
Of
fan,
course.
who I'm just like, I know there's gonna be multiple twists, and sometimes I can guess it right off the bat, but it doesn't matter. And we'll talk about in the second segment briefly the film he does right before this that also has a bunch of twists and turns, but is less coherent than he does it here. For you being this your subjective thoughts, absolutely
Yeah.
zero judgment. Does it bother you? Did you not even necessarily did you guess what the twist was at the end, but did you feel like it was too much to be like, "Oh, it turns out that he was in the asylum for killing his wife. Oops, he didn't actually intend to do it. She found the pills when he decided not to do it. Oops, this is the person who is part of this whole organization."
Trying to get the plans across with the cake
Exactly, and
plan, all that. Yeah.
the cake plan and Dan Daria, who we haven't mentioned yet, who, is in a lot of Lang films, and he shows up quite a bit, and his twist ending, and there's a lot of people appearing to be who they're not in this film, and it feels like maybe it can be a lot of twists. Did that bother you as someone who's watching it for the first time?
Not at all, right? And frankly, like, I'm in the same boat as you where it's like, I don't need to be shielded from the truth in order to enjoy a noir, right? Like,
Mhm.
as long as the, environment is, sound, right? As long as the arcs are sound as well, right? That, like, I actually understand why these people need to do the things that they're doing and how they
Yeah.
are emotionally changing, right? And ultimately, this is Ray Milland's story. This is his story about, forgiveness of himself, or can
Mhm.
he, right? And, the thing that's interesting for me was that not only was I able to guess what this movie where it was going, I also, while I was watching it, knew that it was kind of pulled back. I knew that,
Yeah.
like, the story was trying to be a bit darker than it actually was. So when I started reading a bit about, like, what they had changed to the plot, I was like, "Oh, that makes so much more sense." Like, I feel like that makes the movie better in quotations, right? That being said, the movie that we do get, right, I still think that it's interesting to have this be a guy who's like, "Well, I was going to, but then she did it herself, and then it looked really bad for me, and now I'm struggling with this guilt, how do I live with this?" And having that paired with, this London at the time, being bombed out, right? Everything you'd have to do has to be some kind of sacrifice to the war effort abroad, and you always are looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're not like, there's no sympathizers, right? And he's entering into this like a newborn babe, right? And he's like, how am I going to navigate this? And, if we're talking about how the plot moves and what I appreciate about it, I appreciate that so many of these sequences just play out as interactions with people, and because it's a Lang film, there's no music. I
Yeah.
obviously we talk about the blind guy on the train where like he sees the cake and he's like, "Oh, can I have some?" But like we as an audience, we don't need to have like close up or anything. We just know that he's faking being a blind man, and we know that he's searching for something because he's just crumbling through it all quickly. The storytelling is fantastic, and it's both visual and through expository dialogue. So when it comes to the movie being obvious, I don't think it matters if the entire piece is coming together to make sure that it's efficiently being told to you. It's like, oh, thank you. I know what's going on. Somehow the filmmaker's bad now, like what's going on?
Uh, that's again, and not that I wanna, labor on it, but I don't think it's just because I have a soft spot for this movie,
Right.
but a lot of those complaints, I was like, "Okay, but did you watch it again?" Because I know if you're watching a film for the first time and you may feel disappointed that you know what the twist is, I was like, "But is this story good enough for you to rewatch it?" Maybe some people feel no, which is fair, but I think that this is a film. Again, I've watched it more than once, and that those twists and turns don't matter. It's always fun to see a twist in a film, but I think, as you said, how we get there, the story that's being told is more important and how it's being told. It doesn't always work for every film. There's a lot of films where you see the twist and then it just doesn't work when you go back to
Mhm.
rewatch it, which is fair, but I think with Lang, he's so much smarter than even though he didn't like the script, he did what he does best with a film, and, I think he does a good job. Not
Oh,
that he
for
needs
sure.
my stamp of approval, but, um, before I move to the second segment,
Yeah.
because I know there's a few things that you wanted to expand on,
Yeah.
if you want to, feel free if you think this is a good time to do it.
We haven't really talked a lot about the romance in this film.
Yeah?
And
Mhm.
did you want to save that for another section or do
No,
you
no,
want to
no,
talk about it now?
please.
Yeah, so I think this is probably the most interesting part about this film, and it's
Yeah.
actually a lot of what we've been talking about has been kind of dancing around it, and I actually
Mhm.
wanted to immediately link it to this idea of, is it too easy to follow? I actually think what's interesting about this film is that any moment we get the romantic pair on screen, all tension leaves the film, you know?
Yes.
At no point do you feel any danger when they're on screen, and the movie is not trying to hide that fact either, which I found
Mhm.
shocking, even in a Hitchcock, there would be moments where it's like, "Oh, can I trust this person?" Because we know what she is, right? As we're watching the film, right? We know that she's at least close to Nazi sympathizers, right? So we should really be questioning it more. The fact that we're not being told to from the filmmaker tells me something differently, right? Um,
Mhm.
I thought that was really fascinating, and I do like the performance that's going on. Marjorie Reynolds is very good in this movie. I did wanna call her out because she's very, bright, but then she also
Mhm.
does recognize when things are going wrong. It's kinda like that classic, like, in quotations, Hitchcock thing where she's ready to go at the drop of a hat, but she's different from a Hitchcock protagonist in the sense that she's not, like, pristine, you know? I feel like
Yes.
Hitchcock's always about, like, "Here are my Barbie dolls," right?
Mhm.
And you can find, like, Lang quotes where he's always like, "Oh, I like the bad girls." There's 2 different kinds of misogynists, right? But, like, you can see that, that his, women are at least more interesting in this film and
Yes.
there's, complications there.
It's interesting with the because I read a good enough article that have linked in the show notes about the love story part of this, and I do agree, the tension does leave. Even in the scene where they're underground, because they all have to
Right.
go underground because there's, threats of bombs being dropped where they are, so they have to take refuge underground, and he has to kind of hide his face because he doesn't want to be seen by someone that he knows was gonna recognize him, because at this point, he's wanted for a murder that we know he didn't commit. I mean, we know it in the sense that we trust that he didn't commit it, because he's our
We kinda
protagonist.
see the proof, right? Because like, he
Yeah.
shows the bullets in the gun. It's like, "Okay, well, we know for sure that he didn't do that," right? But yeah,
I was like, even that scene where you're like, something could happen, you feel safe with her. And I remember, I think the first time watching it, also still kind of being a little bit like, is it her performance that's making me feel safe with her, or is it the character? I think it's a blend of both. I think it's
I
her
agree.
performance making us feel safer than we probably should. But as you said, at no point do you think that she's going to turn on him, because I feel like she is just as in the dark as he is. I never at any point think that she knows more than she's leading on to. But maybe that she's more entangled in it than she or the audience knows, which is a fact, that we find out
Yes.
as we watch the film. But it is a testament to her performance, the warmth, because maybe another actress might play it more suspiciously, like the way a lot of the other actor, or even the other actress who plays the, clairvoyant, the faux
Right.
clairvoyant, she's very suspicious because that's what her character calls for. And also a very side note that when I forgot to mention in the visuals, the scene where they do the seance and it turns to black and we just see her face, absolutely gorgeous.
Wonderful.
So I love that shot. But yeah, the love story part, again, we're working within the confines of a Hollywood film. And you'd be hard pressed to find a Hollywood film that doesn't have a romance. So sometimes it does feel forced. It feels natural enough in this.
Mm,
I think that you could definitely do without it, but
mm,
it doesn't bother me. It doesn't feel like one of those, "Oh, well, that he needs to have a love interest in this," because it's not the main focus of the
mhm,
film. It's just something that feels natural to someone who has been through a lot, and he is ready to move on, because that's literally how the film opens up, with him ready to move on
mhm.
to a new life. So it makes sense, at least to me, to have the presence of the love story in this.
I'm so conflicted on this thing because, like,
Mhm.
I feel as though the way it was written in the book was the way that Lang wanted to do it in the film, because we haven't touched on it at all, right? But we gotta, I guess, lay it out there. That wasn't the only change that they made from adaptation. In the book, she was like a Nazi sympathizer, and they run off together in the end, and they're just like, "Oh, we'll leave our past in the past," right? And
Yeah,
I think that we gotta talk about it in relation to Lang's ex-wife, right? Let me tell you the whole story, right?
please.
Fritz Lang was married to another woman. I don't have her name written down.
Mhm.
But there was the woman that he did end up marrying in Germany. I should have her name up because she was the person who co-wrote like Metropolis. She wrote
Yeah, and,
M and like all like even the Dr. Mabuse films, right?
Thea von Harboom?
Yes, yes, exactly, Thea. So what had happened was, both of them were seeing other people, but they were cheating on their spouses with each other. She broke it off with her spouse and then moved into the building that Fritz Lang and his wife lived in, right? And that's how they kept their affair going. One
Yeah.
day, Fritz Lang's then wife discovers the affair.
Mhm.
That day, she is found dead in the bathtub, of an apparent suicide from Fritz Lang's gun, right?
Yes.
This was one of those things I was kinda trying to dance around before we just started the podcast because 'cause I'm like, "I don't know if this has been talked on the pod." Fritz Lang probably murdered his wife, like, let's be real here, right? Like, Fritz Lang probably killed his wife and got away with it, so you get away with this woman, and this woman ends up being a Nazi. right? Like similar to him, like from Austrian background, right? But ends up having Nazi sympathies. And that's one of the reasons why when Lang comes to America, he doesn't bring her and she stays. But
Yeah.
another reason why she stays is because she was cheating on him again. And there's this
Yeah.
whole drama involving his last films, and that could be a whole other conversation. But we're talking mainly about relation to Ministry of Fear. I see this film as Lang working through the trauma he had with killing his ex-wife and being in that relationship with that woman.
Yeah. You know what? I had read that because I was reading his, biography by Lottie Eisner and read through that, because they were good friends, she kind of the author dances around it quite a bit,
Right.
and I read it and was like, this is new information," and then just kind of let it evaporate from my brain because I was like, I don't wanna know, maybe. But I know that there was, like, a whole thing where people even then were talking about it being like, this is highly suspicious,
Mhm.
what happened here." Wild.
It's crazy. It's a crazy story, right? And I didn't mean to spring that on you, I guess, if you didn't wanna, know, but I think it's, like, like, it needs to be brought up in relation to Ministry of Fear because I feel like it's
I know.
directly related to what this film's about. Like, it's literally the details of his life are on screen here, and that's not the first time either. He often talks about, these, stories about, like, spousal infidelities and
Mhm.
then possible murders, right? And it's always about, like, as we've been talking about before, how good are you really, right? And I feel like it's all wrapped up in this thing, right?
I mean, it comes up in some of the other films that I cover on this, and one that will be, later on in the series called Human Desire, which is very
Yes.
much that, that's based off of other texts, but you can as an artist, as we've been talking about with this film, Fritz Lang was very much, the type to impose his own
His own
life.
auteurist,
Exactly. That's what makes them great is not him just being like, "I'm gonna take the text and put it directly on the screen." It's putting that personal touch onto his films. So and actually it leads perfectly into us briefly getting into the second segment and just discussing
yes.
briefly what he does right before this and right after, before we get back into, Ministry of Fears. So
Mhm.
as I said, this film is 1944. What he does right before this, which feels kind of like a precursor to him making Ministry of Fear and is more along the lines of what he wanted to do and more hard hitting, but he does a film in 1943 called Hangmen Also Die. It's essentially it takes place during the Nazi occupation in Czechoslovakia. And it's, again, people within that system trying to escape, and it is very much, plainly put, an anti-Nazi film. There's no dancing around it. It's not trying to dance around it. It's a lot more overt than it is even a Ministry of Fear, which I think is still overt, but this is very, very much overt.
Oh, for
And
sure.
anyone I know who's seen this feels the same way where you're going into watching a Fritz Lang. It's written that he co-wrote it with Bertolt Brecht, and this is his first American script that he did, and Lang knew him and wanted to get him in because at this point he's come over to America, like again, like Lang had, trying to get work in uh, Hollywood as a writer, and you think it's going to be fantastic. It's just it doesn't work because and I think this is one of those cases where the twists and turns don't work. And I felt bad for not liking it. And I talked to some other people who were like, kind of, in those hushed tones where you're like, "Have you seen this? How did you feel?" Where you want to gauge someone else's thoughts before you
Lay
admit
into
to
it.
not
Yeah.
liking it. I don't dislike it. It just was like, it kind of felt like a disappointment more so than me disliking it, where you're like, I know what he wanted to do, especially now with me doing more research on his life and his career. I especially feel like I know what he wanted to do, and it's unfortunate it just doesn't work. But everyone's allowed to have a dud or two in their career. Sometimes when you're too close to something, it doesn't work. And he kind of tries to do something differently with Ministry of Fear, And again, he doesn't like this film, but I think it's a lot more coherent in trying to put out the message, the anti-Nazi message that he continued to explore throughout his career, and always wanted to make sure people knew what side of history he was on.
But he's in such a unique position, right? Because he not only was growing up at the time in which like they rose to power, but he also was directly like linked to some of these people, and then obviously the
Mhm.
relationship. And it's not just that he was in the relationship with her, right? It was that had such a proximity to that headspace, right? It's that he was
Yes.
not just, somebody who is hearing about the Nazis coming to power while he was living in Germany. He was in the heart of
Yeah.
its growth and, like, saw what those people actually believed firsthand. And, we talk about what today is, right? Like,
Mhm.
how we've been responding to today's news, right? And when you've
Yeah.
got, like, the leader of, America talking about
Yeah.
annihilating a civilization, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, 10 years from now, they're gonna be making movies about how MAGA was like the Gestapo in their own sense, right? It's not
Yeah.
too hard to see the differences in that sense, right? That people are conditioned into accepting these kinds of cruelty, and then you see what their everyday talking points are. And I think that that specifically is on display in Ministry of Fear. I think that that's what makes Ministry of Fear an interesting film, is because like
Mhm.
a lot of it's in the double speak. It's in like the, oh, does this person know as much as they know already? And even though both you and I are talking about how there's no tension, right, in the sense of like, oh, it
Mhm.
could, I think that it actually leans well in the terms, like in the sense that I'm viewing this more as a character study of Ray Milland,
Yeah.
right? Like because I'm not viewing this as a war propaganda film. I'm viewing
Mhm.
this more as like a Milland's going through a bad day again, and I feel like he does that really well.
Which I think is why it's so easy to watch, but also feels like, doesn't feel dated in any way. It feels
Mhm.
fresh, which it sucks to to be like, "This feels fresh." I can totally relate to this, but again, even if all that other stuff wasn't happening, I think it's still an interesting story to tell about his
Yes.
character, as you said, character study, which is something he continues to do throughout his career, because what he does right after this is a film. It's actually released in the same year, but obviously a few months after, because back in the day when people could just pump out movies. But it's a film called Woman in the Window, which I do cover in this series. This is Edward G. Robinson, Joan Bennett, two actors he ends up working with quite a bit throughout his American career, and it's kind of your prototypical noir. Like when you think of a lot of um, American noir films, this is always on the list of ones you need to watch. And it's about a guy becomes obsessed with a woman, and uh essentially, this is in the synopsis, it commits a crime, in quotes, for her, but it's more of a study of how he even got to the position, like point in his life where he could do something like that, because leading up to that, it doesn't seem like he would ever put himself in that position. So, and then from there, he goes on to make, like I mentioned, Fritz Lang was already the Fritz Lang, but a lot of the American films that people talk about are the stuff that he does. Woman in the Window and onwards from there,
Right.
because we talk about the Big Heat, Human Desire. Those are all from the 50s. But that's essentially where he was at in his career, and it's, I think, quite interesting to see where he starts off with, because we've, briefly talked about his career in Germany and his silent work, moving on to his first talkie, M, and how he moves from Germany to America. And I think Ministry of Fear is a great balance to be like, he hasn't fully moved on from his life there and trying to just fully forget it. I think this is someone who has a lot of trauma, whether, as someone who was very closely tied to that movement, even if he wasn't on their side. But I'm sure he had a lot of trauma that he was working through, and a lot of guilt he probably was working through. And you can
For
see
sure.
it in his work. You can see it in this film.
If we're talking about the modern, comparison again, right? Like, imagine, like, 20, 30 years from now, right? Like, the conversations with the kids, right? Like, "Mommy, daddy, what did you do when the MAGA people," we're
Yeah.
rising, all that stuff, right? The kinds of things that you don't think about when they're happening, right? But then the
Yep.
moments that they start to happen, that it changes things. It changes your perspective. And it's like, how could you have caught those things earlier? How did I not see them, right? And
Yep.
that's the way I'm coming at this conversation rather than, damn you guys, we should have caught them sooner. It's more so about like these things are creeping, right? They play off of, societal fears and good intentions until ultimately, it's all wrapped up into a thing you no longer recognize, right? And I think that that's the Fritz Lang that's always terrified in all of his films.
Mhm.
And Mystery of Fear, while it doesn't, like I wouldn't say it's like a movie that like rocked my socks off, right? Where I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, this is like one of the best movies I've ever seen." It was like really enveloping. Like I was like, I pressed play and I was like, I'm on the edge of my seat. I'm excited for this. And going through his biography a bit and like what he's been putting out, I view this as like an important film to analyze in terms of Fritz Lang, the person.
I agree. I'm glad they were on
Mm,
the same
of
page.
course.
I still would have had, I'm sure, a great conversation if you hadn't enjoyed the
Oh
film,
yeah,
because I think that you can still analyze a film that you don't enjoy, but
for
I'm
sure.
glad that you got something out of it too. Moving on to the third segment, the trademarks. A trademark that I noticed, especially in this film, especially in rewatching it, is the sets and the art direction in this film. So the art director on this is a guy called Hans Dreyer. Uh, hopefully I'm saying that properly. German architect, started his career in making sets for German expressionist films. So that still comes up. And he throughout his career, he worked on, throughout his career in Germany and moving to America, like again, many artists did at the time. He worked on over 500 movies.
Holy
And
smokes.
I know. This is back in the day. People could pump out things, but also if you're doing the set and then you move on after that, you're like, okay, I have nothing to do with this anymore. I move on to the next. So he was doing a lot a year. It must have been. Um,
Good shoes. Mhm.
for real. He was busy. I'd love to know when he took a vacation.
Mhm. If ever,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, one day vacations. But in some of the other films I've seen of his, and especially if we talk about this one, the sets are very important. He was the type of director. He's a set uh director, and what I mean by that is there's other directors you think of on location shooting and grandiose landscapes. That's not Fritz Lang. You can tell that this is set. Even when they're outside and things, you can tell it's a set, and I don't think it's ever trying to make you feel like it's not a set.
No.
And that ties into very much the German expressionist look and vibe of a lot of those films. And I kind of love that he's just like, this at the end of the day is a film, and I'm working within the confines of a film, and I'm going to make the set something interesting for you to look at because there's a lot of points in this, like some of the apartments look fantastic. Even the carnival looks fantastic. And there's a point where one of the artists and he goes to ring the doorbell. The elaborate doorbell, I don't even know what you would call that. Artwork around it is amazing. And this is all Hans Dryer. So I want to give him a shout out, but also just talk about what your thoughts are just on, we kind of live in a time where we've seen directors are aiming or kind of vying for on location shooting, noting that a lot of the blockbusters are sets but they're very different than what
Yeah.
Fritz Lang is doing. How that works for you, of a film like this, and does it feel claustrophobic maybe sometimes?
Oh, never feels claustrophobic. I just gotta say
Yeah.
that out the gate, right? And I think that, there's a lot of, oxymorons that happen, especially in modern filmmaking, right? Because, like,
Mhm.
they're always fighting for naturalism. They're always fighting for making
Yes.
things seem and feel as real as possible, right? And that's gotten to the point where, like, they don't shoot anything unless it's shallow depth of field, right? Like, it's there's a lot of, like, rigidness that has come from it that's actually removed some of the artistry. And the thing that works when it comes to Fritz Lang's artificiality in terms of creating his worlds on sets is that they're done so in order for him to better tell the story. The sets actually have the way that they're built. Have the camera movements built into them. I was talking about that carnival early on, right? Like that was one of the only moments of like movement I really caught. It was because like it was like pushing into and around this little pie, like cake guessing
Cake, yeah.
game, right? But it was the point where it wasn't just to the point where it was on a long lens and it could come over.
Yeah.
It was actually to the point where people were having to remove pieces of the set in the middle of the shot in order for this to be captured. And there's a lot of stuff like that in this film. Actually, one of my favorite like shots in general is later on when we've got Ray Milland and the love interest. They're on the top of these stairs and they come
Mhm,
all the way down, and you catch them on the middle half and then come down on the bottom half, and it's all times to their dialogue with this other character. It's all based in the power structure of that conversation. And again, if you remember the thing I said at the beginning, the whole idea about keeping all of the energy in the top tenth of the frame, this movie
mhm.
is so committed to that rule that if you follow that exact quadrant, that whole scene, the power dynamics play out exactly in that quadrant. This movie is very well designed, it's that, and that's what a set designer gives you, right? When you are only have the environment that's there in a naturalistic sense, you piece it together, you have to work with what you got, right? The whole point of film is that it's a fiction and that it's fabric, that you can cut it in whichever direction you want. So why would you remove that tool from the toolbox?
I think that was beautifully said. I don't even know what else I can add to that because that explains exactly how I feel about and I love a lot of films that are on location shooting. It's not us saying that shitting on that, and I don't think that comes across
Oh,
as us
yeah.
shitting on it at all. But I think that people, uh that there needs to be a better appreciation for people who are making effort to tell a story and utilize the set the way that, Lang does, and I really wish that people would study that aspect of his films a lot more and realize that you can use a set to your advantage. It doesn't need to just be something that the actors are in. It can be a character, and it can move with the actors, themselves, and he is someone who does that obviously very beautifully, and he comes from a background where that was born, essentially, so and then even with a lot of American films, Chaplin, Buster Keaton, who are using sets beautifully the same way. So
Mhm.
I don't know why it's become a little bit of a lost art, but there's always time.
The answer is time. That's what it is, right? It's because all of these
Yeah.
productions, they wanna make them as fast as possible, right? And so it's like to build a set is, months maybe, weeks maybe, right?
Yeah.
So, and actually, if we're talking about, the current state of things in quotations, I feel like now more than ever Hollywood might die. I feel like people have talked about how Hollywood is dying for years now, but I actually feel like now is the right time for it. And I want to clarify that, right? Because, people have this conversation always about like Hollywood dying, right? How
Yeah.
terrible that is, and I actually think it's necessary because Hollywood was a necessity, right? It was a place that people went to because that's where the movies were made and they consolidated not only,
Mhm.
what movies were made there, but also power there, right? And we're watching as the power is leaving Hollywood. We're watching as the power is becoming more fragmented and geographically based on where filmmakers live. And I actually think that
Yes.
overall, that's actually gonna be a better thing for film in the future. That means that we're gonna get more films made within their own countries, that will actually better represent their own countries, in the sense that like they won't have their stories taken away from them, they won't,
I
have
know.
somebody taking over. It's the money that's gonna be the problem, that's the main deal.
Money's always the problem, unfortunately, but I do look forward to a time where people can tell their own stories and it's still widely viewed, and it's not just like that random, in quotes, "foreign film" that makes it over to North America, and like the one a year that we get that people talk
From each
about.
country.
I
The
know.
only films that those countries made, right? Finland only made 1
They only made 1, and that's all they get. But I do love I love that you brought that up. I'm wondering if there's any parts I mean, with every film, there's always things that you could, talk for hours about a film. But if
Sure.
there's whatever prescient points that you might have in your notes or from that came up in our conversation that you wanna expand on before I ask you the final question of the show?
We've already discussed, like, the major aspects of in terms of, like, the difference in the screenplay and all
Mhm,
that,
mhm.
and like that's not necessarily something I appreciate. Actually, I'll take this in a different direction, because we haven't talked about specifically, and because I feel like we've covered all of the major points. I will say my major critique with this film and the part where I laughed at it, which was the final scene, the
I
final moment.
know. Yes. I
Because,
know.
like, we get this amazing shootout, right? Incredible climax, right? Hard cut to them, in a car, rear projection, right? And I love the line, I do, the whole thing about, like, "Oh, we're gonna have a big old-fashioned wedding, we're gonna have a big cake," and then Milan's like, "Cake?" Like,
I know. It's
mhm,
funny because I tried to read up on this and this may be something out there where he talks about it. It does feel like, when you're watching an old Hollywood film or even a modern one where you're like, okay,
right,
studio interference. Studio was like, you need to wrap it up because it's too
yeah,
bleak. I can almost guarantee that that was the situation. It's kind of hilarious because most of his films don't end that way. They are
right.
more open ended, even his other American films, but as mentioned earlier, he did not have as much control on this film, and again, that's I think because him being a huge control freak, that's mostly why he doesn't love this movie, as opposed to, like, not enjoying the work he did. I think it's just in his mind, he's still pissed off that he didn't or he was still pissed off that he didn't have as much control, but that final shot, doesn't matter how many times I watch that movie, it always catches me off guard, and I always also laugh, where I'm like, "Oh my god, this is so stupid." But you know what? It's okay.
It doesn't ruin the experience,
No.
like, I'm laughing like a belly laugh because I'm seeing it, right? But it's like, if I were to, like, rank this movie,
Mhm.
I would probably say it's, like, perfect TCM Sunday afternoon viewing, you know? Like, you turn on TCM, this movie's playing, you'd be a fool not to watch it, right? It just sucks you right in like that,
Mhm.
That's where this film excels. You can't, like, say to yourself, "Okay, this is gonna be the best Fritz Lang film," right?
Yeah.
But if you let it catch you off guard, it might be one of the most important.
That perfectly encompasses this film. You can't go wrong with a Sunday, afternoon TCM viewing, in my
Right?
opinion. That's
No.
that's a good way to spend your day. But before I let you go, I still have one more question about this film in relation to as us both being, I'm sure you consider yourself a cinephile, and it's hard not to think of other films when you're watching a film, or even after you've watched a film, being like, "Oh, this is a good pairing," or if I would recommend it for people who are like, "Oh, you like this, then you would like this." If you're gonna pair this film and you're gonna make a double bill, what would you pair it with? If you have one or multiple options, feel free to put out as many, but what are you pairing it with, and why are you creating that pairing?
I was kinda going back and forth on what I was gonna answer this with, and, like, I do think that The Testament of Dr. Mabuse would be, like, a good yin and
Mhm.
yang kind of situation with this movie, and to kind of build off of that point a bit, both films do feature a couple being trapped in a room, with a bomb, gag. I'm
Yep.
not sure if that's, like, a Lang thing, but plays out similarly here. But the, other films I was thinking about, and actually who I keep on thinking about in relation to Lang, and this is not a hacky answer, I promise, but David Lynch. I feel like there's a similar, headspace adjacency, and that's to say
Mhm.
that, like, while you think about surrealism in terms of David Lynch's filmography, I do think that there's another layer to his work, which is, like, the, mundanities and
Mhm.
the breaking points in society where you go too far, right? And I feel like that's
Yep.
very close to this whole, like, contradiction standpoint. So, like, I was thinking a lot about, like, your neo-noirs that came in the '80s, like your Blue Velvets, right? I would say that, like, you could pair it with something like that. And then also, like, this will be my final one, and this was, like, one that came to me randomly, and I wouldn't say that these 2 films are necessarily similar, but I'd say that they're similar in the sense of, movies that were made by filmmakers that are great, but don't get enough attention. So, we'd say Mystery of Fear for Fritz Lang over here, then we're gonna say Samuel Fuller's The Crimson Kimono. If you want 2 great
Oh,
noirs, you can pair those together,
nice.
unlikely double feature, and that would work really well. Have you seen that one?
I have.
Yeah.
And now that you even mentioned Samuel Fuller, I think he would be he's a great directed in comparison or on tandem with Fritz Lang and their mentality, the different eras and different countries working in. Although, again, Fritz Lang did work in America for a lot of his career, but Samuel Fuller always has a message that's very clear in his movies, and I think he's even more hardcore than Fritz Lang is about it, but I do agree, Crimson Kimono, definitely a lesser viewed or spoken about film in his filmography. And it's very interesting what he does in that movie without giving it away to anyone who hasn't seen it, but to tackle a film not set in your own country, in that time as an American, a lot of times offensive.
Most of the time, offensive.
Most of the time offensive. Samuel
Mm.
Fuller's too smart,
Kind of
and it goes
miraculous.
about it. It's I love that pairing. That gives me so much to think about. It also reminds me I should rewatch that movie because I think I have the
Fantastic.
Blu-ray somewhere. I kinda went in more I was in the paranoid thriller mind and thinking of one that's more of a well-known one, but I think it would work with this if you're thinking about what they were able to do before the '70s and different wars, different
Mhm.
political climates, even though, again, still the paranoia in the air, the anxiety. I just thought of, your most popular paranoid thriller director of the '70s would be Pakula, Parallax View. You can't really go
Of course.
wrong with, you can go with any of them. I also thought you could do Clute, also, you could do All the President's Men too.
Mm.
I just thought for some reason, I was like, maybe it's just inching, for me to I wanted to rewatch Parallax View because I think the set design or, the just the art direction of that movie is really remarkable. It is also in Clute as well. So I
Mhm.
think I haven't done too much research on Pakula, but I think if I dug not even that deep, I can almost guarantee that he was a huge fan of Fritz Lang, and he was
Mhm.
a huge influence. So I think if you wanna see someone who is carrying on the torch in a different era and obviously influenced by Lang, again, I don't know that to be a fact, but I can almost assume it to be a fact, that I think that would be interesting to see what was done later, and I'm sure there's probably more recent paranoid thrillers. I don't know what they are.
Have you ever seen Under the Silver Lake?
No, but I remember the one time on Twitter, that was the one time I didn't get to see that one because I can't remember what you paired it with. I think I jumped into that
Oh
and I'd
my
seen the
god.
other film, but it's been on my list to watch.
You have to watch it, Felicia.
Yeah.
Like, that's a movie made for you specifically, like,
Oh, yeah?
it's like that the paranoid thriller kind of thing. It's got, like, an adoration for old Hollywood,
Okay.
very it's far-reaching in its commentary while still being very modern, and it's also a 2012, I think, period piece, 2013 period piece, but it was made in 2018. Very interesting.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay. That's always interesting when people go back just to, like, a few years
Just a little
back
bit.
to
Yeah,
think,
right?
"Oh, okay." You know who else I know, the side note, but she's been on the show a couple times, Jamila, uh,
Right.
she's a huge fan of that movie. She
Of
loves that
course.
movie.
Yeah, she's got great
So,
taste, of course she loves it.
shout out Jamila.
Hey, like, in 20 years, they're gonna be talking about it like they talk about, like, The Third Man. They're gonna be talking about it like they're gonna be talking ab
Good.
like, I'm not even being hyperbolic, people are going to love that movie, and they already do, it's just a matter of people catching up.
It's on record.
If I'm wrong, lambast me, put me on a pike or whatever, I'm wrong, whatever, I'll
No,
take it.
I trust you, and I trust your judgment, especially because of the way that we had this conversation.
Of course.
I'm so glad that you one just jumped on for the series, but also that I had you on for this film because I I kind of gauged that we would have an intelligent conversation, but I think that you brought such a fantastic viewpoint to this film that I always love talking to guests, but I love talking to guests who bring things up that I just hadn't even thought of and get me thinking about the film in a different way that makes me excited to rewatch it in a later date, and I get to see things that I didn't see. So, a huge shout out to you. Thank you for coming on
Thank
the
you.
show. I very
Thank you
much
for having me on.
appreciate it. Where can people find the show? I assume it's on all platforms.
Yes, mainly Spotify. You can follow us at These Guys Got Juice, and you can follow me on Twitter at poor old Rolo Tony. We talked about it a bit early on. You should also check out In Films We Trust for that
Yeah.
Larry Fessenden interview. And also, I do make appearances on Unsourced Wall Radio every Sunday at 6 p.m. That we usually talk about horror movies. We're talking about the Children of the Corn movies right now. So really regretting that decision. But regardless, having a great time over there. And
Yeah.
as you were saying, always have a great time on here. This
Mhm.
was a movie and a filmmaker that I didn't know as much about, but I always want to, dig deeper, and treat
Yeah.
it as like a learning opportunity. And I did exactly that here. And I gained a new, bigger appreciation for Lang. And I know that I'm going to be digging deeper in the weeks to come.
That's what I love to hear. I love that.
Hell yeah.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode on human desire. Watch our movies, and we'll catch you next time.